You've heard 4 most interesting talks. I'm afraid I'm very boring considering what I have to say, but let me see if I can entertain you a little bit. I'm a linguist. That means I work on language structures. I was born in India, Calcutta, and spent my first PhD there too. Then I went to Brown and then the Netherlands, Germany, and finally here. Most of my research has been on Germanic languages, so German, Dutch, Norwegian, Swedish, and so on. Older languages as well as the modern ones. But since I was coming to talk to you, I tried to get together as much as I could about Indian languages as well. Now, the great good fortune we have when we are born in India is that we take it for granted that we speak more than one language. And that's, you can't imagine what a wonderful thing that is. I'll end with that in a minute. But let me talk about human speakers and listeners. Now, you've never heard me before. On the other hand, I think more or less you can understand me. If we share a particular common language, even though none of us are probably English native speakers, nevertheless, you can sort of understand what I'm saying. And I certainly understood what the other gentleman had been saying. But the speaker is only one part of the communication. There's also a listener. And most of this time, the speaker is really in control, because you're sitting there, you have to make do of what I'm saying. Despite the echoing environment, despite my not so loud voice, etc., you have to make do. So, but adult speech, no matter which language it is produced with great speed and accuracy. So words are selected from the mental lexicon of tens and thousands. I'm speaking about Indo-European languages, not so much about Turkic or Finnish, because they can be longer. But they are, spoken very fast. For the listener, there are many problems: environment, noisy, vocal tract size, and so on. But more importantly, sounds of words are not discrete, and this is something probably very few of you know, that no word is ever spoken in the same way by the same speaker. You can try speaking your name 2 or 3 times, once in the morning, once in the afternoon, once in the evening. It will never, ever be identical. So you can imagine the variation that we have to cope with. I'll play you a sentence which is not really necessarily true, but it seems to me that Oxford always rains.
It always rains in Oxford, not in Cambridge.
This little bit of the speech waveform is Oxford.
Oxford.
This was my PA who was speaking this, and she is certainly from this part of the world. I'll play you another version of it.
Oxford.
Now that sounds more like a question, doesn't it? And now I'll play the sentence and pay attention to this.
You need black shoes, wool socks, fur dresses, and a brown hat.
So essentially, there's no Oxford in it at all. But it was from socks, fur, and D. I cut that out, and that's essentially what you're hearing. So, segmenting a sentence in running speech is the most difficult thing you can do. And if you don't know the language, it is almost extremely difficult to be able to do that. Now, linguists study the structure of languages. We're not really polyglots. We're not necessarily know many languages. But you need to know about the structures, and generally speaking, the structures of languages are pretty similar. But language is what makes us human. So the structure includes sound patterns, which is what my specialty is, word formation, sentence structure, and of course meaning. I'll focus largely on sound patterns and word formation. So as you know, there is considerable variation in pronunciation, but a word, a spoken language, is more important than the script. The first is the speech or sign language. Sign language is very much a real language, and the script comes later. So if you think about phonemes, that is to say meaningful letters, the linguists developed a system called the International Phonetic Alphabet, which is basically one sound, one letter. Now, no script, when a script is developed, when Panini had his script developed, at that point in time, the sound and the letter correspondences were probably one-to-one, but no longer. Yeah. So, for example, take English. I've given the IPA in square brackets, the phonetic alphabet, one-to-one correspondence, remember. Since it was developed by an Englishman, it was obviously taken from the Latinate alphabet. But a letter C can be pronounced as a K, cat, or, it can be sir, C's. A sir can be sock or nose. Yeah. The same phoneme, a fur, this is Bernard Shaw's famous words, that it can be fur or a cock or physics. They all sound the same, but they are written differently. This is why when you learn English, you have to attend spelling bees. If you had a respectable language like German or Dutch, which has had spelling reforms, you tend to do much better. But English is a mess. But Bengali is not much better. For example, if you have a vowel, a or a, it can be written exactly in the same way. But the writing is the same, the sound is different, and vice versa. You can have the letter is the same, so that there is no difference in Bengali between short E and long E, like Hindi. They're spelled the same, D and D, but the letters are different. So we have, when we learn how to write, now there are many, many, many heritage speakers in this country speaking the languages you speak, but who may not be able to write. But that does not make them any less of a native speaker. But irrespective of the writing system, the way sounds are pronounced is often very regular and predictable. So I don't know how many of you know, but let's take the sounds sir and z. In the writing system, it's pretty much reflected, as you can see. Let's see if this works. I hope so. Probably not. I don't think so. Oh well, let's give up on that. Or maybe this one does. Oh, no, it doesn't. Does this work? Oh, yes.
Yes.
Okay. So you have sir and z, and you can have the plural formation. You write it exactly the same way. Cats, beds, and dogs. Cabs, beds, dogs. But the pronunciation is different. One is a sir, one is a z. So it's pata ka. If you write a sound, then the sound is a sir. If the word ends with a pata ga, then it's a sir. And if you have vowels, or l, or n, or ma, mind you, we're talking about sounds, not letters. Then if you end with these sounds, it's always a z. So maximally, the plural in English is a z sound, not a s sound, but you always write it with a z. So basically what happens is that the voicing of the consonants, pata ka is not voiced, pata ka, ma, na, these are all voiced, all practiced, vibrates. You pronounce it with a z. So irrespective of how the plural is written, the pronunciation depends on the final sound. Now if you think about the Panini structures, for example, Panini's alphabet was beautifully written. It started with the vela sound, but it also respected the aspiration and the voicing. So ka, ka, ga, ka. So voiceless, unaspirate, voiceless, aspirate, voiced, voiced aspirate. So ka, ka, ga, ka. It's beautifully written, but that's not true for most alphabets of the world. Now the mental lexicon essentially is not the lexicon that you look up in a dictionary, it's the lexicon you have in your brain. And you've got to have this lexicon if you're going to be able to communicate with each other. So it is acquired as a child and constrains how one perceives other languages. But languages change. You cannot stop a language from changing. After the pandemic, there was a huge furor about, my goodness, languages are changing so much, particularly your generation is changing everything. Well, not really. I mean, you can't change everything. If you changed everything, you wouldn't be able to communicate. So there is a limit to how much. But every generation builds their own grammar. A child acquires a language. You don't teach a child. You're not going to tell your younger brother or sister or niece or nephew, hey, your plural is all wrong, or your past tense should be corrected. That's not what you do. They will acquire it by themselves. It's much easier to learn a language when you're younger, largely because you just throw the language at a child and you just learn. Yeah, you acquire it. Now, one dramatic aspect of change comes from loans. So, keeping aside bilingualism, most of you are bilinguals, loan words are adapted by adult native speakers already proficient in their L1. Now, you know, if you don't know a language and you hear a name, for example, it is very difficult to actually hear it properly if you don't have the sounds of the language yourself. So, the native speaker tends to adapt what they hear to their own language. So let me give you some examples of words borrowed into English from different dialects. This gentleman is a famous artist. He's native speaker in Dutch. And in English, the American English, is pronounced as
Van Gogh.
In British English,
Van Gogh.
in German,
Van Gogh.
and the original,
Van Gogh.
so the Dutch initial consonant is a ch, so it's Gogh. Yeah. This is German, a famous writer. The English pronunciation, UK.
Goethe.
The English, American English, Chicago has a street name, and you can listen to this on YouTube. 3 variants.
Goethe. Goethe. Goethe.
I didn't make this up. The German original.
Goethe.
So it's not a lack of, as if they haven't heard it. It's simply not possible to hear it properly to be able to pronounce it. So returning to the mental lexicon, what kind of evidence do linguists depend on to analyze language structure? I'll talk about 2 very briefly: manuscript evidence and information from native speakers, and experimental evidence looking at the brain or reaction time. So we begin with historical evidence, and I'll talk about Portuguese and English loans into Bengali. So loans came in from Portuguese in around the 15th century, so around Chaucer's time, before Shakespeare. Massive influx from English, 18th century onwards. And the Portuguese loans came into Middle Bengali, and a part of the vocabulary, it's really, you know, things like chabi, almari, these are part of our, or balti, for example. Now all the balti restaurants that we heard about this afternoon, this word actually means a bucket. The first time I heard this, I thought, what, am I going to eat out of a bucket? No way. But that's essentially a Portuguese word. Now, the loans that I studied came from a library in London. It's a SOAS library. And it was, actually this, as far as I can understand, this young man was kidnapped from Goa, Bombay, taken to Lisbon, brought up there in the missionaries, and then brought back and somehow got influenced. And obviously his writing must have been a young man's writing, a young boy's writing. And so the writing is not quite, well, not quite there, as you can see in a minute. So entries are sort of a bit naive. But nevertheless, if you look at this word Shaban, the handwriting is kind of not quite adult-like. But you can get out of it what you want. So it was called Portuguese Saban, and this was Shaban. The nasal vowel is not possible to say in Bengali, the word ends, so we put a nasal vowel. But this is from where the data comes from. Now, all I want to focus on are the sounds ta and da into Bengali from English and Portuguese. Now, you would think these languages these are all, by the way, all Indo-European languages, right? When William Jones, we talked about William Jones this afternoon. William Jones in the Asiatic Society in Calcutta had already claimed that these languages are related, and in fact comes from the same source. However, Portuguese comes under the Romance languages, Bengali comes under the Indo-Aryan languages, English comes under the Germanic languages. So what Portuguese did was all the sounds with the t were borrowed as Bengali t. So toale, pite, botam, ata, etc. All the English alveolar stops were borrowed as a retroflex. So tile or taxi, time, none of them were the, except for the word Hashpatal, which was a mistake by the missionaries rather than the Bengalis. So the English and Portuguese themselves do not hear the difference between their sounds. They don't hear the difference, but clearly the Bengalis did. And so the t matched perfectly with the dental t, that was it, and the retroflex. Now, let's take a look at some experimental evidence. To what extent does the native language influence what you hear? Does it matter that you're hearing a second language, but you have some of the words borrowed into your language? And I'll give you evidence from that in a minute. There are two examples I'll give you, and very briefly. One is measuring the reaction time, and one is looking at the brain, the electrical activity of the brain directly. So, for example, English has borrowed heavily from Romance languages. So in 1066, William the Conqueror came to England, and basically the English king did not speak English for 200 years. Now, Bengali has borrowed some of these into their own language. So let's take a look at some of them. Bengali words, unlike Hindi, are inherently stressed on the word initial syllable, always. Old English had the same, but you wouldn't think so nowadays. Romance words came in, and so English can have stress all over the place, horizon, mathematics. But when Bengali speak borrowed English words, they're largely initial stress. So I'm going to focus on disyllabic words. We had Bengali speakers fluent in English. Question is, are you affected by your own native vocabulary? The kinds of words we looked at was this. You had words like moral, river, barber, or mandate, reptile. Reptile, you can hear the second syllable could have a secondary stress. Bengali doesn't have these words. So one set of words, the Bengali did not exist. The second set of words, Bengali has them. Pronounced not necessarily the same way, but very similar. So, doctor, nombor, kebil, etc. Doctor, number, cable, migraine, coupon, garage. So, in the second set, you have two sort of stresses. Question, does it matter that some of these words were borrowed into Bengali? We did two tests. One was looking at a fragment priming. So, half of this group, let's say, heard the prime and saw the word curfew, and you had to decide whether that was a word or not. Second half of this group heard an unrelated control and saw the same word, and you subtracted the two. And if this group, if you heard the prime cur and then saw curfew, were you faster at reacting to it? We hope you were. So, and in fact, that's what basically you did. So what you got is the following. I'll give you the result in a minute, but let me explain the ERP. So in the EEG experiments, you put a cap on your head, and you have about 62 electrodes on the head, and you're measuring the fine electrical activity of the brain. It's very, 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 very small, and you need to take a lot of data to make it large. But here, you're not consciously actually thinking. You're reacting immediately. The brain is reacting immediately to what you're hearing. So you hear cur, and then you see curfew. It's very, very fast and very quick. So there is a component about 400 milliseconds from the time you're actually seeing the thing that you respond to the lexicon responds to. If the word is integrated, then you are happy. If not, you're not happy. So basically, it's something like this. If you hear pizza and then you see eat, the words connect meaningfully. If you hear pizza and then you see drink, oh dear, the drink disappeared over here. Sorry about that. Then the brain gets a mix effect. So this is pizza eat, and this is pizza drink. So this effect, essentially the brain does not like this connection from pizza to drink. This was was done in Jadavpur University in Kolkata. We are not allowed to show our participants from the front, so this is the back of the participant, but basically that you do the EEG quite easily over here nowadays. So what you see is this priming. So if you heard all of them prime, so they're all English, fluent English speakers, no problem, but you see a difference. If the word existed in the language, then you got higher priming. If it didn't, then you got lower priming. But more importantly, and this is the thing, all conditions primed, but if the word consisted of one stress, you had more priming than two stresses. Bengali does not like two heavy syllables. They basically like one initial stress, that's it. But English has it all over the place. In fact, this is a sort of reaction we got in other languages too. But look at this. The brainwave is very important. You suddenly see that if you have differential responses, if you have one foot, you see a very different response at this electrode over here, at the left-hand side, as compared to this one, which is much more prolonged and much later, that you see, this is about 600 milliseconds, you see an effect. Yeah. So the brain is very sensitive to what, mind you, remember, they were listening to English. They were not listening to Bengali at all. But this is reflecting that what you had in your own language is actually governing what you're hearing in the language in your L2. Finally, last example would be word formation. Now, you increase words in all languages by suffixes and prefixes, particularly Indo-European languages, and this is very common. You have nation, national, nationality, use, useful, disuse, very, very, very easy to make more and more words. But English has the peculiarity of changing a noun to a verb or a verb to a noun very easily. So you can say an eye or two eye, or a chair can become two chair. Sometimes the meaning is not quite the same, but most of the time it is. So you can say customs officer's eye him suspiciously, it's a verb. But the girl had something in her eye, that would be the noun. He ran fast. Or the husband took a steady run, a sneaky run. That would be a noun. However, when you add the suffix "ing" to it, then it has to be the verb. You can't add an "ing" to a noun. So there are systematic blockages in your language, and the native speaker knows that. Yeah. So you can't do that. The question is, what would happen if you saw "I-ing" or "running"? "I-ing" has to be basically two steps for the noun, the verb, and then the "ing." And "running" is one step, run and the "ing." Does the brain care? Does it matter that in the derivational steps there is one step extra? So is the native speaker, sensitive to this? This was an MRI experiment, so you're looking at a functional magnetic resonance. I hate the MRI, but young people don't seem to mind it. So the design was that you had to just see the button, see a word, you just saw the word, and you sort of put up your finger if you did not see a word which was a real word. So for example, if you saw something like apathy, you raised your finger. And equal numbers of words, you control for everything, frequency, length, blah, 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 etc. And this is what you find. Now, you're measuring the activity of the blood flow. Yeah, that's what you're doing. So in EEG experiment, you're measuring the fine line of time. In a brain imaging experiment, you're looking at what is happening and how much. Yeah. So here is the part which is saying, okay, it is morphologically complex, I'm getting an activation. That's the green bit. Yeah. So "I-ing" and "running" together is more different from something like "herring," which is not complex. So both one and two step verbs cause more activity in the left rhinal gyrus. This one is a subtraction. This is the one that's a two-step. This is the "I-ing" bit. So this is saying, hey, this is more than the blue bit. Now if I subtract it, you're getting this. Yeah, you're getting the red is the activity for the "I-ing," and the blue is the additional activity of I overrunning. So you can clearly see that depending on these very simple words, which superficially in writing is exactly the same, run and ing and I and ing, but nevertheless the brain knows that one is more complex than the other. So I requires more activity than running, and then there is an asymmetry with respect to whether the base is a noun or the base is a verb. Now, again, nobody told you that, nobody explicitly says so, but your mental lexicon knows it if you're a native speaker. So to end this, more languages one has, the better for the brain. And this is something which people keep forgetting. What are languages good for? Particularly in this country, is constantly being told, well, knowing one English is enough, but it isn't enough. The more languages you know, the better it is for Alzheimer, for lots of different reasons. Understanding others' viewpoints across the world, assisting with language disorders. If you have facial paralysis, helping somebody to be able to speak properly again, cleft palate, lots of different things. Brain disorders, aphasia, all sorts of things need linguists to be able to do that. And of course, for speech technology, for advertising, for translations, for anything you can think of, language is what makes you human. So languages are very crucial to being what you are, and particularly in somewhere in India, you're so lucky to be able to be exposed to the hundreds of languages that we have. These are my colleagues who've basically done the work and the grants that have supported the work. Thank you.